Hi, y'all. So the other day, um, I had a nice hangout with my friends. We baked cinnamon rolls, then we did a puzzle, and then we went stargazing. Um, Amazing day, easily my best day of summer so far. And I love my friends very much, but that is actually beside the point for this video. Um, this video, I'm actually going to be focusing a little bit on the puzzle we did. I'm going to expand on that. Um, it was a 500-piece puzzle, and it was Starry Night by Van Gogh, which we all know. Um, and as I was doing the puzzle, not going to lie, my friends were doing the heavy lifting for sure. I was, I did like I did the bottom left edge pieces basically, and past that, I was like pretty useless. Made a few connections, but besides the point. The point is, I realized throughout the process of doing the puzzle that I hadn't actually really fully appreciated Starry Night as an art piece before. I had seen it plenty of times. It's, pretty darn famous. Um, but to me, it was always just like, I, I don't know. I saw it and I just didn't even think much of it. I thought to myself, oh, well, I'm sure it was really good for its time. I feel like it's just so much more common to see things of that caliber nowadays because there's just so much more of us, just like humans because of our, I feel like, relatively short doubling time. And it's like, especially like, I was born post internet being invented and I have constant access to these things. So it's like, I could I could always have imagined it being really cool to somebody back then in Van Gogh's time, but to me it was just like kind of innocuous compared to everything I was like able to seek out and see for myself. But as I was doing the puzzle, it gave me an opportunity to look at the art piece more closely, both in the literal sense, because it's like puzzles right in front of me, but also it's like having to look at at that art piece like in terms of the puzzle pieces, I guess you could say, and like having to look at all of the lines and realizing just like how intricate it was. I feel like I had truly never noticed. Like I thought to myself, hey, it looks cool. I mean, the guy was a good artist, certainly better than me. It's not like I could do that. But like even with all that, it just wasn't a big deal. But getting the chance to look at it closer, I really began to appreciate it more. And as I was thinking about that, as I was thinking about how my perspective changed on this one specific art piece, I got to thinking, like I sometimes do, about the kind of just like the nature of art itself, and the burning question that I like to talk to people about sometimes of what is art. Um, and of course, that's one of those questions that you can't really answer at the end of the day. You just can't. I don't think there will ever be a truly agreed upon standard, um, like full definition of art, everything that art is and everything that art isn't, because it's just an incredibly subjective subject, which is honestly kind of unfortunate for me. I feel like I am slightly irked by subjectivity and mystery. Personally, I like things to be definitive and to have an answer to things. Um, Not that I don't enjoy the process of finding things out when it comes along. I mean, I'm about to be a biomedical engineering major, and I least hope to be part of a fair amount of research initiatives during my time as an undergrad, because my school does happen to offer that. Lucky me. So it's like I understand that subjectivity and lack of answers will always exist somewhere in some form. I don't know if I would even fully want every single thing in the universe to be fully known, because, that would probably get boring. Like, the process of finding out new things is nice. But for me, what part of what draws me to the sciences is the notion that we can take steps to find an answer, like at least we know that. With something like what is art, with the question of what is art, I feel confident in the fact that we'll simply never have an answer, that a question like that is, by its nature, subjective forever. Um, and that there is a part of me that just like that really gets to me, just knowing that. Um, it's not like the worst thing in the world to have to reconcile. I don't like lose sleep over this, but I have been thinking about it a little more lately ever since the puzzle, because I realized that my view on one specific art piece can be changed actually pretty easily if I just start looking a little bit closer. Um, so how can I ever really find a definition of what is art? And I can't even find a full definition of what I personally like and appreciate. Um, this is kind of a non sequitur, but this does have to do with everything I'm saying. It's just, I guess it's just the difference between things I don't know but can discover and things that I don't know but will never know. The worst thing to me is things that I don't know, because I can't even put those into words because I don't fucking know them. Um, in any case, whenever I come across something like this, something that is so subjective in nature, I think to myself that because of how subjective it is in nature, again, in this instance, we're specifically talking about the question, what is art? But because it's so subjective in nature, I think everyone's interpretation holds a similar amount of validity, as long as you're taking the question seriously. So I still think there is some merit in finding one's own interpretation of questions like these, even if you're not going to arrive at a true definitive answer. Nobody is. Um, so I think even knowing that it would be futile if my goal was to find the answer, it is a worthwhile and fulfilling goal to at least try to find my answer. My computer glitched, so this is actually take 2 of part 2 of this video. Um, Maybe that was my computer's way of saying that I was saying something stupid. Anyways, so obviously what I've been getting to this entire time is that I want to talk about my personal interpretation slash answer to the question. Because of course I do, it's my channel. Um, that said, I won't fully just be talking about my answer to the question, because I haven't completely arrived at one. Um, so what I would rather do, and what would give me a lot more stuff to say, is talk about the process of arriving at an answer. Because to answer the question, what is art? I feel like a lot of mini questions have to be asked. Like, for example, let's take the hypothetical. I think most people would agree that a picture of a beautiful landscape, like a mountain range, um, is essentially art. Somebody takes a photo of nature and they frame it and they hang it up, and that's an art piece. I'm certainly not going to fight anyone on that. I'd agree. But then the question comes, is the landscape itself an art piece before the photo is taken? Or is only the photo itself actually an art piece, despite the photo's only purpose being to depict something that already existed? Um, to answer that question, what I suppose we have to recognize is that the photo was taken with a specific purpose and intent, but the landscape just exists. So does the rest of nature. It just exists. So does, um, well, so do all other creatures with who don't have sapience the way that we do. They just exist. Um, and to answer the question, what is art, I need to separate somehow what something that is art from something that isn't art, and I need to find a difference between those two things. And that is the biggest difference I can find between things that are generally considered art and things that generally might not be. Human intelligence and intent to make art is, to me, the closest thing I can find to what defines an art piece. And that's not to say that nature isn't beautiful on its own without a photograph being taken of it, because of course it is. Um, but I wouldn't consider nature art on its own. I would I would consider it beautiful, but I would consider it its own thing. Um, I think I think art, as well as the state of being man-made, is somewhat antithetical to nature and what is natural. And I think I've already spoken about this in a video before. At least I've certainly meant to. I honestly think human intelligence itself is the opposite of whatever we can consider natural. I don't know if that makes much sense. But in any case, that is my best definition. That is the closest answer I have to what is art. I think things that required some degree of intelligence to make, things that were made on purpose, and things that were made with the intention of being art. That third one is a little iffy, admittedly, because things can also be interpreted as art. But even then, even if something isn't made with the intention of being art, if it's interpreted as art, that is still human intelligence. It's just human intelligence in the form of interpretation rather than in the form of creation. So the definitive thing that I can say that I believe is that art requires intelligence. As of right now, I have only personally witnessed humans being capable of that. I wouldn't be surprised if dolphins or crows or really any other ape came along one day and demonstrated a similar capability. I'm not at all closed off to that possibility. That would be sick. But as of now, according to my lived experience, and I think just about everyone's, I've only ever seen humans be capable of that. Which is why I say human intelligence. I could just say intelligence and it would really technically convey the same meaning. But I don't know. Precision is nice. Now that I've gotten to my own personal definition, if we can use that as a framework for a little bit here. How do I lead into this? I didn't plan this out. Another thing I start to wonder about is what would I personally consider art versus what would I personally not consider art. now that I've landed at the definition of what is art, how do I go through the process of making sure something meets all of my qualifiers? Because here's the thing, I don't think the state of being art, nor the state of creating it, is inherently positive. There's very much so such a thing as bad art, as negative art. And the thing is, the notion of creation, I feel like always brings along with it the notion of hope and like positivity, which is like, good. I don't want to like rain on that parade. That's fine. It makes sense. But at the end of the day, technically, art simply isn't inherently positive. Sometimes an art piece is made with hatred in the heart of the person making it. And that's a really unfortunate reality, but it's true. And sometimes the art being made is made by somebody who perhaps unrelatedly has some sort of horrible, thing going on, some hatred in their heart. And how do I appreciate those art pieces? There's a super obvious example to this one, which is that we all know that Adolf Hitler was a painter. And it's like, because I feel like the colloquial definition of art is just so very positive, I can just never be inclined to genuinely consider Hitler's paintings to be art. Um, but like at the end of the day, technically, by all of the qualifiers I mentioned, they would be, because they did require intelligence and they were made intentionally to be art, to be paintings. Um, they're not that great. I will say that. We all know he had issues with perspective going on, but that really doesn't, that really doesn't matter. Um, so I wonder if there's another qualifier that matters to me just as much as the other ones, even if it's not really fair, which is just, is it positive? And I think that matters a great deal when it comes to whether or not I personally can truly consider something art. Is it positive? Is it loving in some way? Um, I don't know if that's really a fair definition of what is art, because, like I said, I don't think creation is inherently positive, even though I think it's fair that the association is there. Um, but I feel like, even if I try to think about it logically and I try to say, well, technically that shouldn't necessarily be a qualifier, I'll always feel that way. And I know that. But, oftentimes I feel like there is a discrepancy between the way people think versus the way people truly feel. Um, so if I were to go strictly the logical route, I would have to say my personal definition of what is art is simply anything that required human intelligence and was created on purpose. Um, and I think it's also somewhat important that it was created with the intention of being art in the first place. But I also think that anything can be interpreted as art, and that also qualifies as human intelligence because it's our interpretation. If I were to go strictly logical and keep my emotions out of it the best I could, that would be the definition I come up with. But if I were to listen to my feelings and I were to be totally honest with myself about the way I feel, I would say it needs to be positive. It needs to be a good thing. I can't consider an AI data center to be an art piece, even though it technically fits my qualifiers. Aside from the intention of being art, but whatever. No, dang it. Okay, I'm still recording. Okay. Um, I don't really have a good conclusion sentence. I do hope all of this makes sense, though.